The word meta gets thrown around a lot lately. This is meta, that's so meta, I love how meta that is, I hate how meta that is. But what the fuck does that actually mean? Basically self-reference, not so much breaking the fourth wall, but say having a concept and then referencing something else that's similar to your concept within it. The Scream films are a fine example. Well, the first or maybe second one might be. A slasher film that takes place in a universe where all the mainstream slashers exist on home video, so things like horror rules are brought up in an attempt to think that it's a way to evade the killer that's actually on the loose, copycatting characters like Krueger, Voorhees, or Myers. Another word being thrown around a lot these days is zombie. Zombies have been integrated into practically everything. Some people love this, some people hate this. Zombies are a cultural phenomenon, whether you like it or not. George Romero made Night of the Living Dead in 1968, and really, since then, zombies have been super fucking marketable. Why were zombies injected into Pride and Prejudice? George Romero, motherfucker. Like it or not, people love zombies. I'm a zombie fan myself. I love me some Romero and Fulci flicks. Doesn't mean I love all zombies, though. No, sir. I really don't care how good the movie's supposed to be. Call me an elitist all you want, but I'm never watching Warm Bodies. Fucking Twilight with zombies bullshit. The only zombie fan service any of us will ever need is within the 1985 horror comedy Return of the Living Dead. This is one of my favorite films to watch over and over for a number of reasons. The first being the story. Remember all that meta stuff at the beginning? Well, this is one of the best genre referential films in all of horror. At least I think so anyway. The title insinuates that it's an offshoot sequel to Night of the Living Dead, but in the film, Night of the Living Dead is a movie, so this takes place in its own version of reality. On his first day working in a medical supply warehouse, Freddy is introduced to some interesting things, like where veterinary schools get those freaky split-in-half dogs, where medical schools get fresh cadavers from, and that Night of the Living Dead was based on a true story. According to Frank, the guy training Freddy, in the 1960s there was a VA hospital in Pittsburgh that had trouble with dead soldiers coming back to life because they were introduced to a chemical originally created for spraying on marijuana plants called 2,4,5-trioxin. Freddy, of course, thinks this is total malarkey, but Frank just so happens to have several drums with corpses in them, mistakenly sent to his supply warehouse many years ago by the US military when they were meant to be sent to the Dow chemical plant. The film pays both fantastic tribute to Night of the Living Dead and acts as its own standalone film. Meta done right, you bet your sweet ass. The characters kick ass. The interaction between Freddy and Frank comes across as super genuine. Both are likable right off the bat, which makes it easy to feel sorry for them. They meet a tragic fate when they accidentally crack one of the army drums, releasing the 2,4,5-trioxin into the air, which slowly kills them throughout the film, sealing their fate as members of the living dead. Freddy's friends are a big highlight of the film, too. Other than his fairly conservative-looking girlfriend, they're a band of bona fide 80s punks. The most notable of Good Guy Freddy's punker friends are Suicide, the only one with a car, and Trash. We'll get to why Trash is special in a moment. Seriously though, if your parents name you Suicide or Trash and you don't become a Misfits tier punk rock motherfucker, you fail life.
I mean, I got something to say, you know? What do you think this is all about? You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
Oh, yes.
Speaking of the Misfits, really the best way to describe Trash here would be Lady Danzig. The general personality and line delivery are just uncanny.
Do you ever fantasize about being killed?
Never.
Do you ever wonder about all the different ways of dying? You know, violently?
Are you a violent person?
Yeah, if I have to be violent, I don't have a problem with it either.
Trash is also the reason why Return of the Living Dead is quite possibly the most fan-serviciest zombie film ever made. Linnea Quigley with short red hair, dancing naked in a graveyard. I don't know whether to jerk off or start headbanging. So we have quite the setup for a massacre here. Teens partying in a graveyard, and a horrible military toxin and a zombie have been released. As of right now, the only dead things to be reanimated are a medical school cadaver and some half-dogs. Not good enough. Shit needs to get a lot more real. After Freddy, Frank, and now Bert, the owner of the warehouse, behead and eventually completely hack up the zombie medical school cadaver, they realize that Romero rules do not apply in the real world. Even with the brain destroyed and limbs severed, the body parts are still moving, so they take a bag of twitchy limbs to Bert's mortician buddy and feed it to the incinerator. Not the greatest of ideas. 2,4,5-trioxin is now released through the chimney and reaches the clouds, which not only creates trioxin rain, but it's acidic as well, which is not what you want when you're a naked Linnea Quigley. The whole graveyard is reanimated thanks to the rain, and now shit gets very real. Eventually, what's left of the gang board themselves up in the mortuary, and the only option left is to call the military, who, as it turns out, have been trying to find the drums of trioxin corpses since the 60s. Let's just say this film doesn't end on hugs and kisses and an 80s freeze-frame high-five. Return of the Living Dead has a generally simple plot that's spiced up with some really awesome characters and very memorable scenes and moments. If you're wondering why the mortician would just let our trio of bad luck fellas burn bags of moving things, well, Ernie the mortician isn't exactly normal. He keeps a gun on him at all times and listens to classical music as he prepares the dead for burial.
You want to burn them?
Yeah, that's what I had in mind, actually.
That's cruel.
Well, I can't think of anything else to do, Ernie.
You just can't burn animals alive. It's just too hideous. Ugh. At least let me kill them first. Take them out in the parking lot and put them out of their misery.
One of my personal favorite bits in the film is when police and paramedics are called in for help and the zombies just continuously rush them.
This is dispatch. Do you copy over?
I'm in dispatch. Send for paramedics.
And yes, the zombies talk in this film. A lot of people associate zombies with brains, but did you know that this is what that's actually from? I really can't think of any other zombie flick that features this, yet it's associated with the whole genre. You think zombies, and you imagine the living dead shambling about and calling out for brains. It's the go-to parody, but this is one of, if not the only film that you're going to find this in.
Looks like rigor mortis is setting in.
Speaking of things you don't normally see in zombie fare, the tragic fate of the two main characters. Throughout the film, as I stated earlier, Freddy and Frank are slowly becoming the living dead, and they're fucking hating it. Every hour, they're being riddled with a new symptom of literal death. They get cold, their pulses begin to stop, they feel the pain of their limbs stiffening. They all but shit themselves, but I guess even in a horror comedy, that's a little too cruel of a thing to add. The zombie design in this film is excellent, most notably the fan nicknamed Tarman, which is the one from the army container. This dude got hardly any actual screen time, but he's one of the most memorable parts of the film. Return of the Living Dead has sort of a big connection to Friday the 13th, namely parts 5 and 6. Half of Freddy's group of friends are comprised of the cast from Friday the 13th Part 5. Miguel A. Nunez Jr. and Mark Venturini. Miguel Nunez plays basically the same character he did in Part 5, and Mark Venturini I actually didn't recognize in Part 5 until recently. He was Suicide in Return of the Living Dead, and Vic in Friday the 13th Part 5, the psycho that chops up the chocolate-loving fat kid. And of course, Tom Matthews, Tommy Jarvis from Friday the 13th Part 6, as Freddy. Return of the Living Dead was written and directed by Dan O'Bannon. This is one of his two only directing credits, but his writing credits are super impressive. This motherfucker wrote the screenplays for genre classics like Total Recall and Alien. He's also responsible for creating the characters in the Alien movies. He didn't write Aliens or Alien 3, but he came up with the characters for them. Aliens definitely wouldn't have been the same without Hudson or the badass Vasquez. He also wrote John Carpenter's first film, Dark Star, a few stories for the awesome Heavy Metal magazine, and because I want an excuse to showcase Mathilda May some more, the screenplay for Life Force. Return of the Living Dead also spawned 2 sequels, neither of which are canon to this film. So whichever one you start with, it doesn't really matter. I think Return of the Living Dead is one of the most solid zombie films ever made, not just as a horror comedy. It's damn good as a movie in general. I absolutely love the story. I can't get enough of the characters, and it's all around just cool. It's a cool movie, especially if you're into the whole punk rock subculture. This film captures it beautifully, from the fashion to the music. The wardrobe looks badass, and there's some rockin' tunes. This is definitely a catch if you're into zombies or you just dig horror comedy. It was April Fooled about a couple of years ago that Rob Zombie would helm a remake that was darker and grittier than the original. Let's hope that stays as a joke forever, because the fun characters and the comedic elements are what make this film stand out as an original in the zombie subgenre. A lot of times dark and gritty just end up being dull and shitty.